When you have grief that's couched with anger or self-loathing or abandonment or whatever, all these other emotions are around it. And finally, as I've gotten older, I've been able to just kiss those birds and let them fly off and know that I'm beloved. But I still have I will always have this grief that things weren't what they would have been if the world weren't so broken, or if these things hadn't happened. And now I would say it's clean grief, to where I'm able to love those who hurt me deeply. That doesn't mean I want relationship with them, because that even wouldn't be a loving thing, I don't believe.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives, in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. I'm so excited to be chatting today with Cheryl Grey Bostrom. And Cheryl is an author, a photographer, as well as a poet. And today we will be talking about her book, Sugarbirds, and her life story. Sugarbirds was the winner of the 2021 American Fiction Awards in literary fiction, general fiction, and cross-genre fiction categories, and finalist in religious fiction. Silver medalist in 2021 Reader's Favorite Awards in inspirational fiction, as well as fiction finalists in the upcoming 2022 Christianity Today Book Awards. And if you guys think that I did that all in one take, you are wrong. Cheryl and I know the truth. Welcome, Cheryl.
Thank you. It's so good to see you.
So good to see you again. We chatted prior to this interview, and we could not stop talking when we met, a week prior to recording this. And so we're excited to be sitting here, seeing each other's radiant faces. And you are in Washington State. So let's hear a little bit about your life, where you live and your upbringing, and then we'll go into this book. And people may not realize how much they will be inspired even by this fictional book in their own grief story. So we're going to dive into that in just a little bit. But tell us then, where are you located, and family, all that kind of jazz?
Okay. Well, I live in far northwest Washington State, within about a stone's throw of the Canadian border and a short, 20-minute drive from the coast. And I was raised in Washington on the Olympic Peninsula, in some pretty wild country surrounding us. And so my love of nature, which shows up in all my work, I come by that pretty naturally. I'm the eldest of 5, and I was raised in a very difficult home with a lot of trauma. And yet from the age of 10, I always wanted to write a novel, avoided it because I was doing a lot of other forms of writing and helping other people with their books, taught. But I guess intrinsically, I knew that writing fiction would be the greatest place to tell truth. And it wasn't the right time. So when I reached the age of 60, I started learning that craft. And and this book emerged out of a writing group when I wrote a sketch about a girl and a fire. And I had little inkling that my personal story would emerge so much out of this in this book, and in a couple of the characters in particular. and it wasn't planned, but it came.
It just birthed. It birthed as you were writing. That is amazing, because you said something about that fiction was the, repeat that part that you said again. Writing fiction was the best way to tell. You said something that your true story.
Yeah, fiction. And I'd watched other people do this, because but that fiction is probably the best way to tell truth. You're making up a story, but you can incorporate elements of truth and elements of one's perception with a freedom that, at least for me, who's pretty private, I wouldn't do in a memoir. I don't think I wouldn't put some of that stuff out there, because our griefs and our stories as a whole are like precious birds that we hold in our hands, and we need to treasure them. We need to nurture them when they're wounded. We need to kiss them and help them fly, and fiction was a beautiful way for me to do that.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. It's true, because you can go deep into places in a fiction, right, into storylines, and go deep into the emotions and feelings, and create situations in which these feelings and emotions are brought up. That is sharing that truth of not only the character, but then also the author, even though the circumstances around what they're experiencing may be different than yours, the emotions may be the same.
Yeah, and it's kind of like editing a picture. You can enhance certain areas, and you can diminish other areas to make the point or the statement, or to bring across the theme of a photograph. And you can do the same in your writing. But when I talk about being private, during times in my life, I've kept a lot of journals, but I always toss them. I always burn them, because I really am not, I'm keenly aware of my own mortality. And oftentimes, some of those entries are written out of times of greatest angst, or greatest grief, or greatest sorrow. And they aren't the whole picture. The joy that emerges from that, I often don't write about, except in a story like this one. And so I don't even write journals anymore, because I don't want those to be discovered as only part of the story. So I'll incorporate them into. Does that make sense? I mean, it's like
absolutely. And as you're saying that, it's like the journals are what would be the other side of a coin? I'm in my Spanglish here. And this is the opposite of, for example, how in Facebook or Instagram, people are putting these slices of life that are like what you want the world to see. Your journals would be like the other face of that. It would be like this, right? So that just kind of brought a lot of different thoughts to mind. And also, like you're saying, it's saying one part of the story, saying the moment, how you felt in that moment, not necessarily sometimes a resolution of that emotion either, right? Because you might not write in your journal like how it was that you resolved that, whatever instance of what you were living through.
Yeah, it's all raw material, and I'm a Christ follower, and my personal relationship with God is really what saved my life, and as he showed himself to me, as he revealed himself through the natural world, which is what I try to incorporate, many layers of the natural world in what I write about. But there's nothing, I'm absolutely believe that there's nothing that happens to us that can't be redeemed, and that can't be healed, and that can't lead to a profound experience of joy beyond what really makes any sense, or of gratitude, or of just meaning. And so in the story, do you want me to should I talk about that?
Yeah, if you want to talk about the story and the characters, or we can go into the backstory. Where would you like to start? About what was the inspiration about writing the story, and your and in your life that kind of catapulted this creation and birthed it, or the characters? Where would you like to start?
I think I'll give a little bit about the story, because
Okay.
then when we talk about my backstory, listeners will be able to tie the two together.
Perfect.
And so this is a story. It's a dual narrative, and there are two young characters. One girl is 10, and her name is Aggie, and she has a mom who's suffering from mental illness, which is increasing. Her mom's manic depressive, and she's losing her mom. She can't connect to her anymore. Her mom's angry. She's heartbroken and angry about this, and she doesn't know what to do with it. She's 10 years old. So her dad, who's an arborist and worked at they have an heirloom seed company, and he was part of the Alaska Forest Service before they moved back to Washington. It's set in Northwest Washington State, right where we live. Teaches her to sketch the nests of wild birds to help her cope with her sadness. And then he talks to her about, the healing and that's present in the natural world, and teaches her about the character of God that she can see in nature. And so she's reluctant at first, but she does start climbing trees to very, very great heights to watch these eggs hatch and to sketch these birds when she comes home. One day when her mom forbids her to climb, she through a series of circumstances, she lights a terrible fire. It burns her house down. She watches that house burn down from this tree house, and she watches her parents' bodies carried out. So she thinks she's killed her parents. And so here's this little 10-year-old girl who has her worldview changed in an instant and believes that she's hated and that she's going to jail and that no one will love her ever again. And she's wild with grief, wild with guilt and sorrow. And so she runs. She goes to the only place that she believes she can find solace, and she goes and hides in the woods. And so for a month, people are looking for this little girl. And because of her skills, of everything that her dad has taught her about survival, about climbing, she is able, even dogs, she's able to evade these searchers for a long time. And yet I realized in writing her, and I had written it before I even realized it, but that she is running from the love that would bring her home. And her grief and her guilt are so profound, and she becomes so shame-based that she hides from those who are desperately searching for her, wanting to love her, believing that they only want to condemn her. And so that's the crux of her story, and then of her emerging from that story. And then the opposing narrative is the 16-year-old girl named Celia, whose dad has tricked her into coming up to stay at her grandmother's in Northwest Washington. And her grandmother's a bird biologist, and Celia likes working with her on rehabilitating these birds, but she's still furious at her dad for leaving her. Her dad has brought her up there because she's gotten involved with this girl who's nothing but trouble. And her mom has also abandoned the family. So this girl has a lot of angst and a lot of anger. And she arrives right at the time this search for Aggie starts. So she joins this search team where she meets a guy who's really bad for her. And she also meets this kid on the spectrum named Burnaby, who teaches her a lot about life. So that's the story in a nutshell. The grandmother's a big player. The two young men are these two girls. And even though they're young characters, it's an adult novel because it's dealing with themes of the heart and themes of tragedy and places where we've failed as parents, failed as adults, failed as children. And yet what happens out of that? How is that ever redeemed? How do we ever find joy out of things that seem too horrible to be redeemed? So that's the story.
Oh, yes. And I haven't read it. And now I'm curious as to how it is they find joy after all this, and how these two, stories, because I'm assuming, like you said, it's a dual story. So at some point, somewhere in the middle, is it that then Celia starts with the search? Is it kind of like you don't know that these two stories are going to be connected? Is that the type of book it is? Or does she start at the beginning?
Yeah, she joins the search pretty early. And
in the book?
I
Okay.
don't want there to be any spoilers, but it's really
I know.
yeah, it's about this, this coming together, and yeah.
And that's wonderful. No, now you see, now I have to read it because I need to know the ending. And not just the ending, I need to know what occurred to take them to the ending. You mentioned these words earlier on, and also when we were speaking the other day, were the words resilience and redemption. And you said, that part that nothing really happens in our life that there can't be that redemption from. So let's go into then a little bit about your life and how then your backstory turned out to be the inspiration to your writing.
Sure. Well, as the eldest of five, my mom divorced when I was about 5, and she, I guess the best way to say it is that we were raised in a lot of chaos and a lot of trauma, and there wasn't, although we had grandparents who loved us very much and we spent a lot of time with them, we came from a generation where people weren't talking about stuff. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so we were pretty much left to our own devices. I'd say we were feral kids, so we would head into the woods, on the Olympic Peninsula. Our town sat right in the foothills, right at the foot of the Olympic Mountains and on the Strait of Juan de Fuca. And whenever whenever things got crazy, we would head out in the woods, and particularly my sister and I would climb trees, sometimes by ourselves or sometimes together, but we would climb to the ridiculous heights that Aggie climbs to in this story. Now, Aggie's able to move between trees pretty nimbly. We didn't do that, but we did move between trees, so I know that it's possible. And we took risks that probably were taken just out of sheer, sorrow, abandonment, recklessness that's born from feeling that you're unloved. When we feel unloved, we can be reckless with these precious lives we have. In the story, Aggie climbs because she has a father beneath her. And I have since learned, and in my faith walk too, that when we have a father undergirding us and loving us and treasuring us, we can climb to great heights safely. And so there are a couple of dads, both Celia's and Aggie's dads disappear for a while in this story. And when they do, these girls' lives change and they make different kinds of choices. And I can say that hugely about my own life. I didn't have the presence of a father, and I had a mother who was mentally ill. And the relationships that we have drive us and compel us into behaviors or choices that we may think have no possibility of redemption, but they do. They do. Mm-hmm. And so in the story, what happens to these girls and what happens at the end could never have happened if they hadn't suffered. It could never have happened if Aggie in particular, if she hadn't gone through what she did, if what happened hadn't occurred, the outcome would never have transpired. And those are things beyond us. We can't imagine them. To me, they speak of a loving God who's caring for us. And and we can think that we're forgotten or that we're abandoned, but a lot of that has to do with our perception of time. I know most of my life I've been pretty impatient, and if something hasn't happened in my time frame, then I tend to think it's not going to happen, or that I've been forgotten, because I did have a lot of abandonment issues, and they're probably all still marching around there unless I remind them of what I know now, But Yeah.
Mm.
So lost my train of
Thank
thought.
you. It's beautiful. No, it was perfect. You said exactly what I was asking, is to share a little bit of your own story. Thank you. Cheryl, the title Sugar Birds, can you share why the title, or would that be a spoiler?
I think it's a spoiler
Okay.
because you're pretty well into the book before you find out what sugar birds are.
Okay.
But suffice it to say that it's something that applies to all of us and has nothing to do with feathers.
Okay. Okay. Just wondering, because I'm like, there was some aspect of that. Now, how did your interaction as a photographer, as a nature photographer, that relationship of you as a nature photographer play a role in your writing? How do you think that I mean, I right now I could probably answer that in my own storyline, but of what I think it could have, influenced. But how did that influence your writing?
Oh, you have good questions, Kendra. Thank you. Yeah, it has a lot to do with the way I think. I'm not a linear thinker at all, to the extent that when I was in school myself and I would be asked to write an outline, I'd write it after I'd written the piece. And as a high school English teacher for many years, I would ask kids to outline, but there were others who thought like I did, and was totally okay with them putting together, unless they were just all over the place. And I'd say, come on, try to get some rails around this so that you even know the direction you're going in. But I think more like a camera lens coming into focus. And so I'm outside every day with my camera, and we live in country that's so breathtakingly beautiful that you just, you almost can't just not be out there absorbing it in every season. And yet when I'm out there with my camera and I have a frame around a scene, I realize that I'm looking at life right there, right now, in this frame that is this window of time that I've been given. So you can capture a photograph that speaks to you and says it can say different things and is interpreted through the eye of the frame that you put around it. And lots of times I'll take these pictures, and as I look at them afterwards, the pictures will talk to me and even tell me what I was seeing or why I even framed it. And that's the same thing, of course, that happens in the story. And in trying to recollect the Northwest and nature in that story has a lot to do with me looking into that frame, seeing how nature becomes a character itself in our own lives. And I thought that's probably it. And then just the detail. I pay a lot of attention to detail. I like to think of myself as a noticer. I've been told that.
Listening to how you described just that moment, even in a picture, it was just so moving, because I don't know, I just got moved of just like, I love observing nature, and I love like taking pictures of sunsets or things like that, and because you kind of want to capture that moment. So I'm not a photographer, but you said it's just how you said it, of just capturing that moment in time, and that also the emotion in which you are in as a photographer, and that moment too plays a part in how you compose it. I don't know, it was just so poetic how you describe that. It just moved me, because when something that really inspires me a lot in life is when I meet people that are living to their potential and to what like they were created to do. Like it just touches my soul. And so when you were describing that and seeing you like visualize that, it just was moving. It moved me. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, thanks, Kendra. One thing that's interesting though, even about photography, is it's my goal, my ongoing goal, to be able to live in the present. And I think when a person has had a lot of grief or trauma, you either tend to live in the past, or you tend to race into the future, race toward the happiest next thing that you can, or race, and I've done so much of that in my life that it's been a long, slow learned, intentional discipline to try to be in the moment. And I'm not very good at it. Even when I look at these pictures afterwards and I go, oh my goodness, look at this scene. And I remember feeling it when I was there in it, but it's almost like it has more power in the recollection. And I don't want it to be that. I want it to remind me of having that same intensity of experience when I was in it. And that's coming. It comes sometimes. It comes more than it used to. But to know that right now is enough and that I am beloved in this moment and there's giftedness all around me in it. I don't need to live like Aggie did, where I'm believing, that nobody could ever love me again, because that was my early message, And so sometimes grief, this is going to sound like a leap because I'm jumping from the photography into this, but sometimes grief takes a long time to get clean. When you have grief that's couched with anger or self-loathing or abandonment or whatever, all these other emotions are around it. And finally, as I've gotten older, I've been able to just kiss those birds and let them fly off and know that I'm beloved. But I still have I will always have this grief that things weren't what they would have been if the world weren't so broken, or if these things hadn't happened. And now I would say it's clean grief, to where I'm able to love those who hurt me deeply. That doesn't mean I want relationship with them, because that even wouldn't be a loving thing, I don't believe. But that I can love deeply, and I can still grieve what happened and what never happened, what never happened, and what could have been. So
I had never heard it put that way, of the other types of emotions. Because grief is so complex, but the fact of how you describe that as grief kind of being accompanied with these other things, other baggage, and then not allowing the person to truly grieve because they're kind of having all these other things around it, that when you release those things and just carry just the grief itself, is just different than when you're carrying it with the resentment, with the anger, with all these other emotions. So thank you for.
And you know what else, Kendra? I'm sorry to interrupt.
No.
Another thing about that is that I think that we cling to things like anger. I did cling to the anger or the resentments, because it gave me a false illusion that I could change the other person, or that I could control the outcome. Because if I was angry, then anger bears fruit, right? Or it's like you can do something about this pain, this heartbreaking pain of loss. Mm-hmm. Like you can do something about it. And so I even think about Kubler-Ross's, steps and the way we rotate through grief or whatever. Anger is a component in that. But there's tremendous freedom in letting go of control of all that stuff. And also control is an attempt, at least for me, I can't say this for everybody, but for me, it was an attempt to keep myself safe, because I was in some very, unsafe situations when I was little. And as you do that, and the more you acknowledge it, the more you can get free.
Yes. Yeah. So true. Yeah. It gives you a false sense of, like you talked about control. These other emotions give you a false sense of control. Like you can actually control, the outcome, when really it's, there's nothing to try to control or fix or anything like that. Right. With grief. Now let's talk about your growing up and having this, experience in your life of your life not being the picture perfect, quote unquote, idea of what life would have looked like. And how did your life kind of transform into you kind of coming to terms, like you said, of, things happen really for us, not to us, component of life. So when did that realization that everything that had happened, just like with Aggie and her story, that had she not gone through what she goes through in the book, the outcome of the story would, of her life would have not been the same. When did that aha kind of moment happen within you? Or was it just so gradual that hard to pinpoint?
You know how when you're 30, you think, oh, I get this now. And when you're 40, you say, oh, I didn't get that at all. Now I get it. And then when you're 50, the same thing. I think it's incremental. Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing for me was, I'll back up even further. When I was little, I can realize in retrospect, I didn't realize at the time that it was God reaching for me. But there were times when I was so inconsolable and so, things were just so dark that I can just see times and places where people who I later learned loved him reached out to me and took me in, either through mentorship of some kind, or having me spend the summer at their house, or just so many things. Even as a junior high kid, I can remember walking by this church on the way home from school. I had about a mile walk, and I didn't know anything about that church, but and I was young. I was an 11-year-old, 7th grader, 16-year-old senior. Just walking in that church and just sitting in there. And for that moment, before I headed back into the firestorm at home, experiencing comfort and love. But it wasn't until I was 19 and in college that I met God in a way that was so personal to me, and found out his deep love for me. And even then, it's like taming a wild cat. You don't just say, oh, you love me, isn't that great? I'm just going to be just fine now. You just keep moving and keep growing, and then gradually circumstances compound to where you realize more and more the truths about love, about forgiveness, about sorrow, about all those things. And that was really a random answer.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't random. It made sense, because you basically you shared really of God and the presence of God being really your comfort in this process of your life, and that kind of being your cornerstone, your anchor in your life, right? In your teens, when you discovered his love for you.
Yeah, and what's so amazing about my walk with Christ is that it wasn't just head knowledge of me deciding that I'm going to subscribe to this ideology, and that if I believe these things, then these things will help me in my decision making. When I made a commitment to him, I became indwelt by the Holy Spirit, and I had this guide and this comfort inside of me that I can't even describe. His peace, I can't begin to describe it. But it was nothing born of me, or nothing born of me deciding that I was going to feel just fine. It was him saying, I'm here, I'm going to love you, we're going to get through this, and this is not all there is. It's going to be okay. And I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know how much time it would take, and like I said, I lost my I lost myself a number of times because I'm impatient, and because I was familiar with abandonment, or familiar with that. And I would assign all those human failings to this God that I love. And then there he'd be again. He'd say, no, I didn't leave you. I didn't leave you. I'm here. And yeah, I'm so grateful.
That's beautiful. Now that you talked about love and abandonment, how did then that translate into now the family that you've had and that you have, and being able to now be married? How many years have you been married? I've been with you 45 years.
Yeah.
So you see the amount of transformation that had to occur for you to be able to have this solid relationship of 45 years, right? Because fear of abandonment is something that sometimes makes people then be the one to leave, right?
Yeah.
Before they're left. So, so that's a lot of growth, Cheryl. So I commend you for, oh my gosh, I mean, imagine how much growth and the fact that you're, so tell us about your life and your children and your grandmother and all this beautiful present, your present. Tell us about your present.
Well, that 45 years really says a lot about my husband.
It's more about him than it does about you.
Yeah. He's given me a lot of room to be who I am. And he is just steadfast and loving and wonderful. And he's also very interesting. Remember, I am a runner by nature. If I can run to the next best thing, that was my early pattern because I'd rather, some people are fighters, some people fly, the whole fight or flight thing, but I would escape if I felt like I was going to be harmed. And so when I met him, it was a sophomore. This is a fun story. Yeah. I was a sophomore in college, and he asked me out once, and I turned him down. Junior year in college, we went out for about 6 weeks, and without getting into all the details in it, I broke it off, and he just vanished. He wasn't going to grovel. That's what he says. I didn't, And so then a year later, he had just gotten into veterinary school, and a friend who knew how he had felt about me, one of his roommates, called and asked me just to make a congratulatory sign for him for this party. And so I took this sign to this party, went with my roommate. It was a big surprise party for him for getting into vet college. And he and I ended up talking until 3 a.m. And I just thought, oh my gosh, what was I thinking to break up with this guy? This guy is amazing. and we were engaged 4 months later.
Oh, wow.
And so, but one of the things that made me fall in love with him, it's just one of many things, but he talked about how he tried to make a robin's nest when he was a kid. He tried to sculpt it, and I'm just a bird lover and a nature lover. And he shared a lot, he shared a lot of that same stuff, and he would do these pen and ink sketches of birds' nests and so many things. Okay. So many things. So he captured me. He captured my mind, and he captured my heart, and he was so steady, and I'd never known anyone steady. And I've chafed against that at times because of my innate flight or whatever, but gradually he's brought me home, and it's wonderful. So we have 2 kids. Both are married to wonderful spouses, and they each have 2 kids, boy and a girl, and they're on opposite coasts, so we're on planes a lot. But I'm just grateful beyond words, and that those kids actually survived. No, but they're great kids and very, very solid, beautiful people, and I'm thankful. But that's God's work. That's not because I am such a great mother, because I'm not.
We're all learning, right? And we're just here to birth them and kind of give them that space to grow into who they're gonna be. But that, man, it takes a lot to be detached also from the outcome of how our children turn out.
Yeah, good luck with that one. Good luck. Yeah.
So hard. Yeah. Cheryl, I wanted you to share the story of when you took your daughter to get horseback riding lessons, because I think that I don't know, I really like that because it says a lot about the woman you became and kind of trying things out. So would you mind sharing that?
Oh, okay. So, when I was a kid, my grandmother would take me down to this ranch just below their place, and where I would ride horses, and always loved horses. Never had one of my own, and so years later, we're living on a country acreage. I'm married to a veterinarian. Our daughter's 5, and this friend tells us he's actually a farmer that my husband does work for. He tells us about this pony that he knows about that this little girl wants to sell. She's outgrown this pony. So he takes me down. We bring this little Shetland back, and Shetlands are notorious for being crafty. They'll rub you off trees, they'll take you off, and this pony did rub our son off of her back out in our orchard. But I brought this pony home for our daughter, and the same farmer said, well, there's a shortlisted Canadian Olympic rider a mile from our house, and she gives lessons, and you might want to get her oriented and take her over there. So I did. So I took the pony, and whose name was Ladybug, by the way.
Cute.
And took our daughter over there, and she had a lot of fun. But then I soon realized that, this was also for me. And so I got a horse and then rode dressage for many years after that. But as an outgrowth of that, I thought once again how we need to give ourselves permission to find these joys and not just live them out through other people. And I don't know really what that has to do with all of this, but it was like a recapture of something that I'd longed for in my own childhood, which was a lot of fun. Is that what you were asking?
Yes. No, I love it, because a lot of times we were talking about this when you and I were chatting the other time, that we think, oh, I've already learned what I've had to learn. And so taking on even new passions, as adults and things like that. And the fact that you competed as well as an equestrian, I think that is just so beautiful and so inspiring. So that's why I wanted you to share that story.
Yeah, just knowing you can always keep learning new stuff. You can always keep learning new things, and growth is never finished. Another thing that you and I talked about too, which has a lot to do with our pasts and our presents and our futures, is that even brain science has changed. When I was raising my kids, they told us that a kid's personality was formed by the age of 5, and that, parents, you're on especially till age 5, because if you don't give them what they need, they're going to have this huge deficit their whole lives. And my friends and I have talked about this, and we just thought that was just horrible. It was horrible for moms to be hearing that stuff, because, what do we know? We're hardly out of our teens or 20s, and whenever we have kids, and this is new to us, and we're going to do the best we can, but come on.
So it's like, we're going to mess up. I know. I messed up a lot.
Everybody messes up. We can't give our kids everything that they need, but I had a therapist, when I was working through a lot of my stuff in my 30s, I had a therapist say to me, Cheryl, show yourself some grace here. There's a lot of problematic parenting that's healed later in life, and it's never too late for healing and for growth. And, when you're coming from the basement, you're starting from a different place than somebody who starts on the top floor in their parenting. And let's see, I don't want to get back to what we were talking about, but the brain science now, brain science has changed to show that even well into our well, until we die, that we're still forming new neurons, we're still developing new neural connections. Our brains are always changing and growing, and that, things like nutrition, which is a choice, things like exercise, which is a choice, can make huge differences. That, some of these health issues where people say, well, I've got this genetic predisposition to whatever. Lots of times it's a genetic, or it's a familial dietary pattern, which can be changed.
Yes, epigenetics. That's why now they're talking about epigenetics too, like changing the whole way in which we're supposed to go just by our lifestyle and our thoughts. And the concept too of just how much influence there is on our emotions influence our outcome as well. That spirituality as well, I feel, has a huge impact as well. And huge. I mean, so it's like we're a whole being, right? So
well, and even these crazy screens, with my work, I'm on this screen an awful lot, and it has to be a real intentional disconnect for periods of time, just to engage, flesh and bone, touch the earth, go outside barefoot, to be connected with the natural world and not just the virtual one.
Yes, no, that is so true. Okay, now as we wrap up, is there anything specific that you want to share that I have not asked about, whether in any regards to either, well, your book will talk a little bit more about how people can get it, but is there anything I did not ask?
Anything you didn't ask? I don't know. You're pretty good. No, you're really good.
Or something that you're like, oh, that I don't want you to, like, when we hang up, for you to be like, man, I didn't say this part I really wanted to say. And we're probably going to do that. I know I do that myself. I'm like, man, I didn't ask her this. So is there something that you'd like to share with the listeners that I have not asked you?
I'll think of it in the shower when I'm feeding the dogs, but but I guess that for anybody who's in a place of dark grief, that I already said this, but just be patient. You aren't alone in it. If you choose to seek the help of God, He's there. He's as near as a whisper, and that in the story, I'd love to hear your thoughts about the story, and you can reach me at CherylBostrom.com. And I'd love to connect.
Wonderful. Perfect. Is that the best place to find Sugarbirds, is on your website, or where would be other places people can find it?
I have links to buy. If you want a personalized or signed copy, I've got a link on my website and other links where you can get it. There's also an audiobook read by the award-winning Jane Entwistle. She's got like 4 pages of books on Audible, but you can find it anywhere.
I love audibles because I love listening while I'm walking my dog. So I might get the Audible version. that will be what I will be listening. If people see me crying while I'm walking my dog, they'll be like, "What's going on?" Oh my gosh, Cheryl, it's been such an honor to have you, and again, to be able to chat with you and connect with you in this way. Thank you so much for taking time of sharing your story, of sharing Aggie and Celia's story. And there was the other 4th character. It was Burnaby and the other one, Cabot.
Mm-hmm.
Cabot and Cabot. So these 4 characters that the listeners will get to find out more about in the book. So make sure to read Sugarbirds. And if there's a way of being able to reach you with any thoughts that they have on the website, they could reach you. Okay. So when you read it, reach Cheryl and share with her what touched you the most of her book. So thank you so much again.
Thanks, Kendra.
Thank you.
Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, If you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.